and then I'll share
Okay.
this video and
Okay.
The calm must come from within. There will always be a storm outside, and there may be no place to hide. The calm, then, must come from within. There will always be those who will rattle your cage, eager to share their contagious rage. The calm, then, must come from within. There will always be more to get. There will always be reasons to fret. The calm, then, must come from within. You can't escape the race in the outer space. The calm, then, must come from within.
Well, I did notice that was skipping quite a bit.
Was
So I don't
it?
know. Yeah, I don't know if you got if people could understand all the words, because at least on my end, it was kind of off. I'm not sure, maybe something got lost in the uploads and downloads, in terms of quality and stuff like that. But at any rate, the concept was the inner peace or the calm must come from within. That's the thing. And yeah. Well, Jace, I'm really interested, since it's Native American Day, I'm interested in looking at um, how Native American culture, or at least your culture, because there are different Native American cultures, but in your culture, how do you see peace? Is there a word for it? And do you feel like the word has some meaning that's different than the English translation? I can't hear you. Your mic's off. There you go.
I always do that. Always, never fails.
It's easy to forget.
First of all, when you said it's Native American Day, is Thanksgiving Native American Day?
Oh, well, for some of us, we've translated it and just say, okay, whatever that other thing was about, that's not what it's about for us. It's like, okay, give back something, So any excuse we can have to say it's Native American something, some of us do that.
All right, I got a kick out of that. I thought, oh, okay.
But it's Native American month or something too, isn't
it? It's Native Heritage Month or Native American Month, yeah. November, month of November.
So I just throw all of that in.
Yeah. Well, I got an email asking people to sign a thing, saying a petition to form a new holiday, an indigenous holiday, national holiday. And I thought, oh my gosh, we need another national holiday. But so I have to think about that one. But when I was talking to Ryan yesterday, and we were talking about what the South Dakota Humanities does and so forth. And I mentioned that this talking circle, I call it that. This discussion, brainstorming session is, I mentioned to him that I really appreciated the fact that South Dakota Humanities is, when we did the Festival of the Book, it had a land acknowledgement statement that we all said. And that really made me feel good. It made me feel included. It was an inclusive, important, vital, affirming statement. And so that makes one, it made me feel more at peace and more connected to whatever I was going to do, whatever author I was introducing or whatever, because that's what we think of as when we think of what I think of anyway, when I think of peace, when I think of being in balance with the world around you. And the closest word that we have for, well, one of the closest, there are different words, but the closest word that I use oftentimes is Wolakota. It's just Lakota with a W-O in front of it. And Wolakota is essentially the feeling of being in balance with the world, with the universe. And so that includes being in balance with yourself, like the video said, be calm. First with yourself, and then the world around you, but not just the human beings, the two-leggeds that are around you, but everything else, including all of what we call all our mitakuyepi, our relatives. So our relatives are not just our human relative or those blood or adopted or married into relatives, but those relatives that are in our environment, which are the mountains and the trees and the rocks and the animals and the insects. Sometimes I don't like to be so close to the mosquito relatives and the fly relatives, because they kind of upset me a little bit sometimes, but being at peace with all of those things in your environment is I think embraces it's all involved in the concept of Wola Kota, striving to reach a balance, a harmony, if you will, being harmonious. And so how is it obtained? We always talk about how should we try to be more peaceful. And in that video, it said, be more calm. When I think of calm, though, I don't think of so much, it's not an action verb to me, being calm. But it is, though, because you're trying to put your blood pressure down, you're trying to get centered, or nowadays they talk about mindfulness. And so mindfulness has been a real catch term, or being mindful of your state of mind and of your presence and of how you feel about your situation and so forth. But I try to be Wolakota. I try to think of what makes me and helps me to be calm and to be at peace and to be connected to other humans and also everything in the world. And so the thing that does that for me is when I'm on the land, when I'm out walking in the forest, or walking at a sacred site, walking at Bear Butte, taking a hike up, not the whole thing anymore, but walking to the place where the sweat lodges are on the spiritual encampment part of it. Being in those sacred spaces really helps me find peace within myself and within the world around me. And so what I feel like is, it's a lot of people nowadays, I think it's hard for folks to find peace in their lives. And perhaps because of all the outside things that are happening, that are bombarding us from all directions. And so we have to be conscious of that, and we have to work towards finding that peace, that balance. Another thing that when I think of Wolakota, I think of the concept of the medicine wheel. And I think we've made that reference to that before in our discussions here in brainstorming. But if we haven't, being in balance with all the four quadrants, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, trying to understand that, all of those have to work together And sometimes I always told my students, and I continue to think that the part that I really have to work on for myself is the physical one, because I've had physical problems, you know, all of my health problems all of my life. And so that's the thing that I really have to be conscious of, and make sure that I don't miss my appointments, and I take my medication, and because if I don't do those things, and I know they come back to haunt me very swiftly sometimes. So when you wake up in the morning, you know, you have to exercise the hands, and so they can move, so you can be mobile, have to move your knees and your legs and so forth, and so that you can stand up and move around. You know, those are the kinds of things that I work on in my medicine wheel, and the Lakota word for medicine wheel, the closest word is Changleshka. And that circle of hope, or that circle, that sacred circle. And so that's another symbol, if you will, associated with being in balance with the world around you, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. Being in balance with your relations, all that is around you. And also, when I think of peace, I think of our great philosopher, and he was a holy man, but he was they had written a book about him, Black Elk Speaks. And I think of his teachings, and I think of his when he talks in his book about finding the different ways of looking at peace. And he said in his visions and his dream, the same way is peace, calmness, inner peace, and finding those things that help you to be a good person, if you will, is first finding that first peace within yourself. So even he mentions that in his book, and a lot of Lakota medicine people talk about that. They talk about finding that inner peace first, because if you don't, again, and I think a lot of counselors and so forth will say that to their clients, if you know, encourage them to find that peace within their self, because if you do not, I feel if I'm not at peace with myself, then how can I be at peace with the world around me, and with my relatives, with my family, with my sons, with when I get out of kilter, I found that in a lot of households, when the matriarch in the household gets out of kilter, it really causes problems for the whole household. It's really like she is the rock, you know, she's the one that keeps keeps everybody on task, and also keeps people alive, you know, feeds her children, and makes sure that they're, again, emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually connected. So anyway, when I think of peace, I think of the first peace, finding peace within yourself. And then Black Elk talked about finding the second peace. And the second peace is that which is found between two human beings. So relationships between a man and a wife, a man and her husband, you know, men and women, that marriage, or that relationship, or parents and their children, or friends, two friends, finding that peace, and that connectedness, and that relationship. And then he talks about, and it can be between two tribes as well. But mainly when he talks about the third peace, he talks about finding peace between two or more nations. So I think the examples that he gives in the book are those examples when you talk about the Anishinaabe people and the Lakota people. whether they were traditional enemies with one another, but then they found that peace in different ceremonies where they did get along, and where they had a truce, and they had a ceremony, like for example, the one ceremony, the making of relatives. And so that ceremony then brought us closer to a group that we considered to be out of our circle, not part of us, and were not considered to be an ally of us. We were their enemy. But by finding that third piece, by finding that connection between two nations, it helped it. And it could be even extended further beyond that. If you find peace between two tribal groups, between all of the tribal groups, or all of the nations of the world. I don't want to sound like a world peace, but the thing, that's what he was talking about. He was talking about finding that peace within yourself and then reaching out further, making that ripple, making that circle go bigger than just yourself. But finding peace with other things in your environment. Finding peace with how you feel about the land, and how you feel about the what people now call ecology and the environment. The land and the waters and so forth are not, the animals are not our enemy. We also need to find peace with those entities that are in our world. When when the things happened at Standing Rock, and the people there kept saying, we are water protectors, and others from outside kept saying, you are protesters. And they kept saying, we are protectors. We are trying to protect the water for future generations. And I was looking at different things, and I like quotes, and I like people that have deep thinking kind of stuff. And I was looking across one, and I found one. It said, water is the driving force of all nature. Water is the driving force of all nature. And so I thought, I wonder who said those deep words. No pun intended. It was Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci said that. I go, Leonardo da Vinci.
You always thought he was a mechanic, right?
Yeah, he was an inventor.
Yeah, but he was lots of things. He
was.
Yeah, I mean, he was an amazing person. One of the more interesting footnotes is that he could write 2 different letters with each hand at the same time.
Oh my gosh.
That was one of the things that people noticed. That's a little odd. Everybody doesn't do that.
No.
But back on our subject, you had a lot of interesting things to say that I would like to delve into. And when you talk about finding, or Black Elk's talking about finding that, that first piece, or even the second or third piece, one of the things I find that's interesting about people searching for that is that they don't seem to have a methodology and or a practice to bring that into reality. So that as a concept, many people will subscribe to the concept, yet be left standing on the shore when the boat leaves for being peaceful, and it seems like they don't know how. Can you talk a little bit, or is there something that you can offer us about how the practice of finding peace happens within your culture or within you?
Well, what many of us do, and actually what what we were instructed to do through ceremony. When the pandemic, for example, when the pandemic started, our relatives had a a ceremony. This happened to be at Standing Rock, but there were ceremonies that were held at Rosebud, and it was interesting because they kind of all said the same thing, more or less. They said that when you get up in the morning, be sure to smudge yourself with sage or sweetgrass or with cedar, and they especially said to use cedar because it'll help you to breathe better and to inhale that. And also there's an herb that actually is an introduced one but anyway, there are different herbs then that people breathe in. And when you're doing that and you're saging your house or smudging your house or yourself, and you're getting in a mindset that I'm beginning the day now, I'm going to, prepare myself for the day. And most people call it prayer when they're praying in the morning. Some people call it meditating, but you're thinking about what you're going to do that day. And that's something that I do every day. And even if I really don't have anything planned that day, I still want to do the best that I can and be the person that I believe I am, a good person. And if whatever I'm supposed to do that day, I want to be able to do the best that I can, whatever it brings to me. So that's how I begin my day. And that's how I end my day as well, by smudging off and acknowledging all of the directions and all of the entities and all what we were talking about in that medicine wheel, acknowledging that. And as part of that, of daily practice, I guess what helps me is to be able to give thanks to the ancestors and give thanks to those relatives that have given their lives. So that is in the form of putting out tobacco. I usually put out chashasha. That's the inner bark of the red willow. That is our tobacco. And I also give out food, a little piece of food that we're eating, like in our meal, to put a little bit of everything that we're eating out for the spirits. And that's something that a practice that I've been doing since childhood. My grandmother, even when we would go to the store and on trips, or we'd be in the car, if somebody gave her a candy bar or popcorn or whatever to eat, she would always pray with a little piece of it and then put it out the window and say, for all my relations. And so that is that acknowledgement of giving back or giving thanks, gratitude for having being able to have something to eat is something that we do daily. So it's not something that occurs on just one day on Thanksgiving, or a Native American Day or any other particular day, but to acknowledge that we are grateful that we have food to eat and that we are alive and breathing. And so you are breathing when you breathe in that cedar or that sage, or it kind of, and when you're putting your tobacco out, you're breathing in the fresh air, and you're acknowledging all that which is outside your house. And so that's a way that it helps get me going every day and helps me go to sleep every night. So that's I don't know, I don't want to say it's routine, because it shouldn't be that way. It should be something that is fresh and new to you every time that you do it. But that's what helps me, and that's what helps a lot of our relatives, our human relatives as well. And sometimes you're really blessed. Like last night or the night before, I was I was thinking about something and praying about my auntie who just, her soul, that she passed away, and she was 102, and we're going to have her funeral starting Friday evening, the services, and then she'll be buried Saturday. Marcella LeBeau is her name, and she's very,
Oh, I heard she died. Yeah.
yes, very, very wonderful matriarch of our family, our Tioshpai.
Mm.
And so I was thinking about her, and I was putting tobacco out, and I put it out in our backyard by the fence there. And there was a fawn that was standing there, and that's maybe 20 feet away from me. And it looked at me, and it didn't. Sometimes, they'll run. Animals will run when you surprise them.
Yeah.
And that little fawn just looked at me and kind of nodded its head. I don't know if it was a her or him, but it was a Bambi. It was little, and I felt good. That made me feel good. It made me feel that being acknowledged by the spirits. So you see things like that happen, and it reaffirms your connectedness to that which is holy and that which is out there in the environment.
Mhm.
So
I'd like to bring Charles into this conversation. Charles, have you had any particular perspectives on peace? Something that you've discovered that maybe is not widely shared or brought up, as far as a perspective or something, an observation about peace?
Well, I think probably my most dramatic experience was with that. It was in the week of 9/11, and my students were clearly traumatized by that. I was with them the day that was happening. I was on the way to class when someone came out of the building shouting that we were being attacked. I went on in, and we had the TV on in our classrooms instead of the usual class, or at least I did. But in the weeks to follow, I talked with them quite a bit about it, and listened to their concerns and expressed some of mine. And what I discovered in the course of those conversations is that my students had no education in alternative means of conflict resolution. They didn't have any idea but retaliation. So throughout the course of their educations to that point, K into college, it was pretty clear to me that almost none of them had that discussed with them. There are alternative means to war when things get bad. And, I suppose I explained to them, and I'll say this, having had the experience of war, I'm still not a complete pacifist. I don't think Hitler could have been talked out of it, for instance. But nonetheless, if you look at the long history of war, you understand that almost all of them were unnecessary, that there are alternative means of conflict resolution. So it was really curious to me that, Jace mentioned interpersonal relationships, that they hadn't apparently had anyone broach that subject with them. You don't have to fight with each other. There are other means of resolution. I think, by the way, that we're doing better with that now. I do think the schools are now more cognizant of the need to talk about alternative means of conflict resolution. But I was really struck by that my students seem to have no frame of reference for anything other than going to war as a response to this and subsequent events. And so then I began to teach courses in conflict resolution, honors courses, and I taught 2 or 3 of those, and then got a committee together, long story short. And we proposed an interdisciplinary minor to the regents, which they approved. So that was established, and it's still in place at SDHC. It's an interdisciplinary minor in peace studies. But I'll say this as an aside, one of the things that amused me in the unfolding of that, negotiating it with the regents and going up the chain like you have to do, they were very much concerned about course duplication. So I had to demonstrate to them that there weren't any other peace studies programs at any of the other universities, because they didn't want to duplicate that. That's funny, I think. In fact, I think it's pretty close to hilarious, but that's what the response was. I had to prove that USD and Black Hills and so forth, just weren't doing anything having to do with these studies.
And it's funny how there are some subjects we don't mind duplicating, but something as critical as conflict resolution and things like that.
Whatever the budget people, the bottom liners and so forth, not wanting to, they wanted to trim the fat, as they always said through the years, by whole career. So they wanted to find ways to cut costs. And so that was the impetus for that. But having said that, I found that my students were very open to those kinds of conversations. In the introductory course, we had a service learning project where they went to various places, including schools, and tried to be involved in conflict resolution. And it went very well. As far as I'm concerned, still goes very well. And there's a long tradition of it in American literature, in world literature. If you look at some of the great literature, a good part of literary tradition has to do with what you might call peace studies, conflict resolution in American literature, conflict resolution in world literature, and so forth, on and on and on, some of the great works. And so it's curious that there was so little of that in my students' background. So that's been my most dramatic experience with that. And I'll also add this, that when I started SDSU from the beginning, I began to have relationships with tribal folks, mostly through education, but spent quite a bit of time with tribal people. And as a returnee, I was very comforted by some of the experiences I had with them and their emphasis on bringing the warrior back into the circle, helping him or her restore his peace of mind, and restore relationship with the community and the community together, trying to reestablish balance. And it's not a one-time thing either. You go to powwows and you see that reenacted all the time. Those old guys in their various uniforms from various wars, that's ongoing. That it really heartening effort by the community to bring the returnees back into the circle and to restore the balance. And it was much more helpful to me, I might add, than the other kinds of things that I experienced outside of tribal environments, the trades and all the welcome home stuff. that, you know, this day and that day. And as she said, that more experiential and ongoing effort by tribal people to bring us back into the circle and to restore the balance. You know, I didn't feel like a non-Indian in those environments. I felt part of it, you know, and I felt comforted by it. It was important to me. It was part of my healing.
Both of you have had distinguished careers in teaching, and I would be curious to find to know your approach to teaching peace. Even if, you know, how should that be done? When should it be done? Where?
I don't, Charles can talk too, but how I find is by modeling that behavior and keeping calm and keeping a sense of connectedness in within the classroom environment, and allowing students to speak their piece, so to speak, but also to be civil and to be respectful of one another. Because what Charles was talking about is, you know, that's part of the healing process of our veterans when we welcome them back into the circle. And well, the same thing is in a classroom. All of the individuals that are in the classroom are part of your circle for that period of time, for that semester or whatever. And I think it's imperative that I show my students respect, and also have them understand that I have some information to share with them, but they also have something to share with the group. Again, that group imperative, that they have something that can also teach us things as well. And when I talk about smudging, you know, every morning, I smudged all of my students. Every student that has taken a class from me has gone through a smudging ceremony at the beginning, near the beginning of the class, either the first or second, usually the second class. First class is looking at the syllabus and all that, but the second class is I prepare them for it. Ask them if they have any allergies, that what I'm going to do, and they don't know it, but I'm praying with them, and I'm acknowledging their spirit and their presence in that environment. And I want to take off any negative thoughts they might have with sage, and then put any positive thoughts, and encourage positive thinking and cooperation and expanding their ideas through sweetgrass. And sometimes I'll burn other things, other herbs, sage and so forth, but I don't burn marijuana.
Wow.
And that's really, that is something that is, people would be walking sometimes, you know, oftentimes I left the door open because, you know, you don't want too much smoke to be in, and you have to be careful because some of our newer buildings, the alarms, the things that, you know, go off because of the, I don't know, the heat or the
Smoke
smell.
alarm. Smoke alarms, yeah.
Yeah, so the door was usually open, and invariably there'd be somebody walking by, and I could see them out of the corner of my eye. They'd stop outside the door, and they'd kind of peek in, and in fact, some faculty even would say, what are you doing in there? Are you smoking pot? Or, you know, and I'd answer
Yeah,
back.
come on in.
I'd answer back, how do you know what pot smells like? So anyway, but it doesn't smell like pot, but people, you know, but I've been told by students that I've had, like in the 80s, they've come back to me and they say, you know, when you smudged us with sage and sweetgrass in our class, I still, whenever I smell that, I think about your classes,
Oh, yeah,
and
sure.
I think about what you taught us.
Mm,
So they haven't forgotten that. So it can be a real powerful kind of um, method, I guess, but I didn't really do it to be a teaching method or anything. It was something that I felt was important for me to do and for them to be a part of.
Well, you know, that it's interesting because aromas have been used in cultures around the world to induce a sense of calm and peace. There are different people have different formulas and different kind of woods and grasses and oils and things like that, that they, you know, because different places they have different plants, you know, and so they use the plants that they have. But the interesting thing is, because of our connectedness as humans, it isn't, you know, the geographic specifics don't necessarily correlate with our location. You know, in other words, like if you take something you're using in Standing Rock and take it to India, it can work. And if you find something that they're using in India and you bring it to Standing Rock, it can also work, you know. So that's I find that's quite a useful tip, and I appreciate that, because I will focus on bringing that to people now, because a lot of times people need to be put in a space where they can like even appreciate the sense of peace and calm. And a lot of people who haven't experienced any peace or calm in their whole life. I mean, you try to think of somebody who like was born in a war zone and they can be 20 or 30 years old and they have never lived a day when there wasn't war. They weren't in war footing. Or people who grow up in a household where people are always fighting and you always have to be ready for a fight, or a community where there's always some kind of social turbulence. And pretty soon your mind that becomes normalized. And so the idea of like peace and calm can feel really strange. And even the concept of it can be difficult to get across. So having something like an aroma where something happens different in your brain to introduce that sense, I could see where it could be useful in some cases.
Of course, you always have some that say, "Oh, it smells horrible," and
Change incense. Well, maybe we will bring in that marijuana.
not in South Dakota. The recreational marijuana has been.
Well, we'll get it back. We'll get it back. Send them to Colorado. We.
He says you can't do that, so.
Yeah. But my glaucoma is messing up. I need.
That idea of peacemaking, that's what I didn't want. I don't know. I like my classrooms to be calm and to be, open for discussion and for folks to be able to share their opinions. But I never did teach a peacemaking class, or conflict resolution class. But I'm thinking that my background, or my way of classroom management, I guess, is that I would look upon those students as part of a tioshbai. And I told them that you are related to one another in this classroom because you're two-legged, you're human beings. And so you need to be understand that sometimes you're responsible for those other human beings in your classroom. And so I talked more about responsibility than, and I noticed that the kind of probing questions today were about justice. And so I think more about responsibility than justice. Although I was happy about the Aubrey case. That was, I thought that was justice recently that was given. But the Rittenhouse case, yeah, I don't know. And most of the people that I know a lot of veterans, and because of Sam, my husband was a veteran, and in Vietnam, but he most of the Vietnam veterans and others that talk about using assault rifles and things like that, they've been there and they've used those weapons of destruction, and they've killed people. And so they really take that seriously, and most of the ones I talked to and sent me emails and all that were very upset about how a young man can walk down a street with a powered weapon and cause such destruction that way. They were very much against that, taking the justice, if you will, into his own hands.
Right.
So that was an interesting outcome.
Yeah. Charles, how would you teach peace?
Well, I echo what Jace said about teaching in general, and this is the case for me for 9/11 and the Peace Studies program. I did lecture. I gave many lectures occasionally. Some of my responsibility were information needed to be provided, for instance, in writing courses, teach the methodology, and so forth. But my classes were predominantly discussion. And whenever possible, we'd sit in a circle. And you could do that even in most of my classes, which were large lecture classes, 20, 25 students. And we would discuss the readings. And I would emphasize to them that I was there to learn from them as much as they were there to learn from me. I thought of myself as a lifelong learner, and I would say at the beginning, I've lived a lot longer, I've read a lot more books, I've had more experiences, but I haven't lived your lives. I haven't had the experience of your 18 or 19 years on this earth, and I can learn some things from you if I pay attention and if I respect your perspectives. And that worked. And I put a really strong emphasis on knowing them. I'd have them write little biographical statements at the beginning of the class, and I'd pretty much memorize those early on. And then I would have individual conferences where I would find out more about them and their families and where they were from and so forth. And I would emphasize them throughout the course. You're a person. I know you. We need to know each other in order for this to work. And I would tell them about, well, a number of the things I've learned from tribal people and continue to learn from tribal people. One of the best things was this idea of relationship, which Jace has talked about. And I would say, I'm not going to make you uncomfortable by using relationship names necessarily, but I want you to know that I think of you in terms of relationships. So I think of you as daughter and granddaughter and nephew and cousin for the non-traditional students. I think of you in those terms because when I do, I take our relationship more seriously. You're not just a student. You are my grandson. And I need to care about you in those terms. And, I guess some people think that sounds a little corny, but for me, it was very good. And they appreciated it. And I think, especially when I got older, I tended to think of me in those terms, you know, grandpa, maybe. But that, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't ever any problem of that becoming less than respectful. In fact, I think it created more respect between us. Them knowing that I was thinking of them in those terms, rather than in the traditional student, teacher, you know, authority, client, which is now what educational administrators like to refer to students as, by the way, clients. That moves us away from where we ought to be in teaching and learning, and ultimately it's about learning from each other. And that was always very rich for me. I always look forward to whatever I could learn in a particular class about a story I'd read many times, but had not ever really had the experience of it through those students' eyes. And so I learned from them. I want to, before we run out of questions, I have our time. I want to add a quick question for Jace. And it's kind of a teasing question, you might think, but then again, it's not. It's a pretty serious question about peace and conflict. You mentioned early on mosquitoes and flies. And we've got those, haven't we? Literally and you know, metaphorically throughout our lives. It's easy enough to be peaceful with robins, you know, and sparrows and meadowlarks and so forth. But semi-seriously, Jace, how do you come to terms with mosquitoes and flies and those creatures, which to us are mostly irritants?
Bothersome, yeah.
Right,
Bothersome.
yeah. What do you do with that in your life, wherever you encounter it, starting with the literally the insects?
Well, it kind of depends on where those insects are. I say that because if those insects, if like, for example, are flies, if there are too many flies hanging around food, like if we're at a Sundance ceremony or some sort of ceremony outside in which flies are trying to land on the food, the ceremonial food, and land on food that people are going to be eating, you know, I get a little bit nervous about that because of germs and whatnot. I don't want to get anybody sick. So I actually try to either, we tried all kinds of things at Sundance to try to kill flies. I'm sorry, but we do. We kill them and we try to get them out of that area. Now, but if they're around outside and so forth, I just brush them away. You know, I don't kill them. But if they're going to cause harm, and it's kind of a metaphor for other things as well. You know, sometimes you have to just go around, you have to escape, you have to get away from things that are like bees. You know, you don't want to be batting at those bees because they're going to come and attack you further, you know. So you have to, you know when to get them out of your environment, or else, you know, live with them, move around, move faster, or move away, or brush them away, or let them buzz around you and be calm and be still, and they'll get bored and they'll leave. And so it's kind of the way that I look at life. There's sometimes that you have to be more assertive, but there are other times that you have to stand back and not try to be so quick to launch and to kill. And that's kind of what we talked about last week about fight or flight. You know, you decide what your battles are. You decide what's what you want to put your energy in and deal with. But in the classroom, sometimes we had to do that. We had some mosquitoes in there that were troublemakers, and that tried to cause problems within, the environment there. And so that's usually I didn't, my sons even asked me, did you have any students that are really belligerent and that really, that came to class drunk or high or whatever? And how did you deal with it? And so I said, I was really lucky. Of my 33 years of teaching, I can remember 2 times that an individual, they were both males, and separation and location. One was on the reservation in a college setting, and one was off reservation at Black Hill State. And when they came into class, and so they were like the fly or the mosquito or the the bee coming in there half shot, and
Wasp.
a wasp, perhaps a yellow jacket.
Yeah.
And so what did I do? I just pulled them out of the class. I didn't let them come into the class to harm any of the other Tioshpai, your students, your members there, your sons, your daughters, your nephews, your grandchildren, and pulled him aside, pulled him out and talked to him face to face and said, you cannot be here now. You have to go home. If you can't go home by yourself, if you need help, I will call someone to escort you and to help you go home. And so I again, I guess it's peacemaking. They didn't fight me. And in both occasions I was lucky. I guess there wasn't any altercation. Actually afterwards there were apologies. I'm sorry that I came in that condition to your classroom. That was very disrespectful. So, but I was really lucky throughout my teaching career to not do that. One thing I wanted to say before we leave here, because it's 10:30, we said we'd leave early, and here we are, we're yakking away.
No, there's quite a bit to say still.
I will say that Ryan's going to be in trouble with his mother because he told her that he'd be here at noon.
Oh,
He lives in Sioux Falls.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to make it.
I was
So
reading.
there won't be any peace at Thanksgiving dinner.
I was reading my book, and I all of a sudden I got this note on my watch that said brainstorming 10:30. Is like, oh, I forgot all about it.
I told your mother that you had forgotten that you wouldn't be here at noon, so she's okay with it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
she's at peace with it.
Yeah, she's at peace with it. Well, it's
Jace, I want to hear what Jace has to say, though. She has a final thought she wanted to share.
The final thought I guess I wanted to share is that I had written an essay on Wolakota years ago, and I don't want to read it to you, but I just think it's really important for especially now for us as we're coming out of it, hopefully coming out of a pandemic and so forth, that I think that's really taught us as people that we need to find peace, and we need to search for more harmony within our environment because there's so much ugliness now that is happening. People are so upset about things that are happening in the world, and there will always be something that will cause us to be upset or to be sad or to be angry. There will always be something, and so how we deal with those things, I think, are very important as individuals, but also as societies. And I hope that we find those peacemaking methods to help one another cope.
Well, Well, thank you both for joining us, and really appreciate the comments and introspection and reflection that you have offered us today. And I hope that those who see this video will take away something useful, as I have. Well, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week. Brand new show.
Thank you for your lives. I'm happy that you're in my life.
Thank you.
See you, Jace. Dad, I'll see you in about an hour.
Okay, I'll tell your mother.
Happy Thanksgiving to the mama.
Thank you.
Tell her that too. Thank you. Bye,
Take care.
folks.